Aloha, o Don Wasson, ko inoa, noho mali na aina I nā kupuna o laʻia vai. My name is Don, kahalo mapuana, tautafa, ka aihue, ke awia mahi, Wasson. I am 7th generation to this land. It was given to my grandfather, one of my grandfathers, Kuanono Ehu, and who married Kamake Kapu. And we've been here since 1804, before the Mahele. And we're still here on this land in the Ahupa of Laie. I was born July 16th, 1944. I'm 71 years old. I am a widow. I was married for 48 years to Henry William Wasson Sr. We had 4 sons, Henry Jr., Harry, Hayne, who's deceased, and Henny. I have 13 grandchildren, and I was born in Laie, and then we moved to Kahuku when I was in the 3rd grade, or 8 years old. And then, I traveled all over the world. And then in 1973, I moved back here in Laie and on this land, and I've been here ever since. I've been here 40 plus years, and in the time that I've spent here, I met kupunas, or elders. It was interesting that they came to explain to me about their lands here in Laie. And they were saying that they had lands and they can't find their lands, and they wanted to know if I could help them find their lands. And I was like listening to their stories, and I said, oh, these probably stories they made up. And so one day I decided I better go find out and see what they're saying is true. So I went to the tax survey office to look up Laie, and I saw all these Hawaiian names. And then I went to look at the Bureau of Conveyance to the lands that they talk about. And sure enough, what the kupunas, or what the elders were saying, was true, that they did have lands. So then I asked myself, so what happened to their lands? And that started this journey of finding out the lands of the Hawaiian people in Laie. And then I heard all these stories, how they lost their land, or sanctions that were taken against them. And some of the things that really pained them was that they had transaction with the church. That is, the church had asked them to what we call mahi aku mahi mai, exchange use. So the church said to the Hawaiians, Kuleana landowners, let us use your land, and you can use our land. We will pay your property tax, and we'll pay you an annual fee for the use of your land. And so the Hawaiians thought, oh, what a great idea. We don't have to pay the taxes, and we can make extra money, So anyway, they did that. What they didn't understand was when the church took over the land, they didn't know the church was going to change the land, the contour of the land. And when they changed it, that is, when they went to take the taro patches and put it into sugarcane, they destroyed the boundaries. So the kupunas died. The next generation came. The lease was still going on between the church and the families. And then that generation died. So here comes the 3rd generation. So they go to the church leaders and say, hey, we want our family's land back. They says, oh, that's great. You show us where your boundaries are. You survey the land, and we'll give it back to you. Well, the church leaders knew that the people didn't have the money to survey, and the assessed value of it wasn't even worth the surveying, so they walked away. But those who didn't walk away, they were threatened, saying that if you take the church to court, you will make the church look bad. And if you held a position in the church, they removed you. And if you went to the bishop or the stake president for a temple recommend, you were denied. And the reason why is because you made objections to the leases and the lands that you wanted back. So there were all these sanctions taken against the Hawaiian families who own these lands. But in the church, two Mormon missionaries in 1865, Francis Ashbury Hammond and George A. Becker, on July 17, 1865, they bought the Ahupua'a of Laie, 6,194 acres. But the boundaries were never, exterior boundaries were never surveyed. So when they sold land to these 44 families, excuse me, they sold them an undivided interest in the whole Ahupua'a. So what they were trying to do later on, they were trying to buy them back, but the families wouldn't sell it back. They kept their lands. And so even up to today, the church and the legal firm, law firm that they've hired is trying every which way to remove the church's obligation to this undivided interest. The only people that are in the way of the church accomplishing that is people like myself. Because we know the history and we have been adamant that we will not give up our family lands. What's interesting is one of the parcels they claim is theirs is this graveyard. And so they have, charges with trespassing. And so we said, hey, listen, this is a graveyard. Name one of your ancestors that are buried there. And they couldn't name any. I said, well, my grandmother died and buried in that graveyard in 1917. She's the second to the last to be buried there. Her grandfather was buried there in 1921. So everybody else in this graveyard is earlier than 1921 or 1917. We can name them, but you can't. So whose land is this? Okay? But what they want to do is they want this burial site to build condominiums on the bones of our ancestors. And so we have been adamant that we will not yield to this kind of bullying that is church entities. Now,
tell me why the graveyard is so important. Why are the remains so important to you?
Why are they important? That's who I am. Those are the bones of my grandmother. If I cannot honor the bones of my grandmother, then I violated the most important thing about who I am. My existence is because of them. I would not be here today if not for them. So their Evie is mine. And I am obligated as an elder to protect these lands. At the sake of my life, I am obligated to protect it. And I will. And I shall. So that's why I've been adamant about these land issues. It's not only the land issues for me and my family, because whatever applies to me, I am also fighting for the other Kuleana landowners in Laie. And whatever applies to all of us in the Kuleanas of Laie also affects the people in all of Hawaii. For example, we went to lobby the city council about property tax. Many of our Kuleana landowners were losing their lands because of property tax. So we went with 25 students of Hawaiian language from Kahuku High School, 12 elders, and we lobbied the city council, and we got them to approve an exemption of, we pay $300 a year, no matter how big or what type of land, whether it's farmland, ag, or commercial, or residential. You still pay this flat rate of $300 a year. But there's one thing you have to do. You have to prove you're a lineal descendant to the original awardee. We can prove it. We have proven it. And so this land we live on has that exemption.
have there been people who have been taken off their lands during your time here?
Oh, yes. People have been locked out of the lands. The Mormon church put gates. They've fenced areas out where people couldn't go in there. And so what they're doing is they're proving that they're taking adverse possession, hostile taking of other people's land. And that's been going on for a while. What the people don't know is there's a law saying that you can claim adverse possession, but you cannot claim adverse possession on multiple properties. You have to be able to claim adverse possession one parcel at a time. That's called tacking. But people do not understand that you cannot tack. You can only claim one parcel at a time. But the Mormons have been, they have been diligent in claiming all of the lands that they can get hold of. But the most important one is the land, the taro lands of Laie. And why are the taro lands? That's about 64, 68 acres. Why those taro lands are important is the water. The water table in Laie is there. When the Mormon church bought their lands, there was no water there. So they knew that the lands where the Hawaiians were at, those were the lands that they wanted. That's why they went to lease the lands from these Kuleana landowners, so that they could feed all of their lands that were dry.
So what's hard?
You've mentioned a lot about the Mormons. Have you been part of the Mormon?
I'm fourth generation Mormon. I've been threatened with excommunication on several occasions for my views. I participated in the strike in 1974 at the Polynesian Culture Center, supporting 6 Fijians. They had a contract, and Polynesian Culture Center management made a contract to provide education, housing, and employment to these students. Well, when they came here, they didn't provide any housing. They didn't provide any education. All they did was provide employment. They needed them in the village. So the students were struggling, and so they went up to the university to get a Fijian doctor, Dr. James Anthony, to help them. And so Jim Anthony came to meet with me and asked me if I could support the Fijians. Well, I looked at the documents and I said, well, these people made the contract, so they have to abide by it. Long story short, what happened was the Fijians had a strike. They closed the Polynesian Culture Center for about a week, I believe. Trade wind tours under McGregor paid the protesters $2,000 apiece to lift the ban on the buses, and they filed a complaint with the National Labor Relations Board. They had the hearing and found that the Polynesian Culture Center had fired them illegally. So they had to retroactive 1 year of income, and they had to post in the Culture Center and in the Brigham Young University that they fired the students illegally.
So how have your feelings about the church evolved, or how have their feelings evolved about you?
Well, I really believe that from all of the things I've been involved in, well, what happened, you got to hear this. During the Polynesian Culture Center strike, I mean, the leaders went after my husband, saying that you're the priesthood holder, you should control your wife. He says, I can control everything about my wife. I cannot control her mouth. And smart man. And then I was called in the bishop's office, questioned about my activities. And I said, well, I'm there supporting them because it's an employment job. It has not to do with the church. And the bishop agreed with me. He wanted to know what were they doing with the money. And then this is the first time that the Cultural Center hires a non-white person. They brought in Bill Cravens, who's Samoan Haole. And so they were trying to show that they were not only promoting white people from Utah, but now they're being open in allowing non-whites to hold high positions in the Cultural Center and in the church. Well, Bill Cravens was no better than any of them because he did the same with them. He rip the people off of money and all this kind of stuff. There's so much scandal in that place at the cultural center. And then the church tried to, anyone who participated in the strike, they tried to excommunicate them, they tried to get them fired, and and this didn't happen. But the conditions of the cultural center improved because of the intervention of 6 individuals, 6 Fijians. Families in the community were torn apart. People took sides, and people you thought you knew, you found out that they took a different stand as you do. And you're saying, wait a minute, didn't you guys teach us that whenever there's an injustice done that we're supposed to stand and defend them? And he says, yeah, but these guys are not from here. I says, no, it doesn't matter where they're from. If it's an injustice is an injustice, no matter whom. So then we realized that our people, our parents, our grandparents, our family, our friends had double standards. And to us, that was not right. And then we knew we couldn't trust it. Those we respected and loved were now telling us what they said and what they did was 2 different things. And we said, no, we cannot do that. We're not going to be like them. So in that journey, the Cultural Center, it opened up my eyes as to the leadership of the church, leadership of people in the community, and I realized these people had double standards. They lied, and they could live with it, and I couldn't. When there's an injustice is an injustice, and if it's not right, I will not tolerate that. Another thing we did after that was there was the sewage spill. BYU sewage treatment plant did not complete the treatment of sewage, and it was being dumped 1/8 of a mile into the stream, into the water, and into the ocean. The fecal and coliform count was in the thousands. We were able to get a report from the Board of Health as to the amount of the count before they were trying to hide the information with the Board of Health. And so we went to see Sierra Legal Defense. And Sierra Legal Defense decided to represent us. We became the plaintiff, and we sued Zion Security Corporation, now known as Hawaii Reserves, and Brigham Young University, Hawaii campus. Well, we went to court. They held us out for about 9 months, and then about the 11th hour, they just cut off all negotiations. And they said, well, we decided that we're not going to go through with any of the negotiations. 1 minute after 4, our attorneys filed the documents in the federal court for the violation of the Clean Water Act. And they just happened to have a law clerk waiting, the law firm representing the Mormon Church, waiting, and found out that we did sue them. So with the suit, we were able to prevail. The settlement was the Mormons would build a brand new sewage treatment plant, cost them $6.75 million. They would hire these 2 engineers to overlook the sewage being built, $600,000. My consultant, Dr. James Anthony, they paid for his consultation to the Hui I was president of Hui Malama Aino Laie. They paid him $125,000. And then they put $2.3 million in a trust fund for Hawaiian culture issues, education, and environment. So that's what the outcome came out of that. But they made sure that this money could never be used to sue them for the Kuleana lands. Okay? And that the money could only be used for Hawaiian cultural issues, education, and the environment. Okay? So that's one of the things we did. Then we sued them because they didn't have a water permit to serve the public. So they said that the water system is a private system and everybody in Laie are their tenants. Well, that's not true. Kuleana landowners were never their tenants. And so when we filed a complaint with the Public Utilities Commission and with the Commission on Water Resource Management, then these guys had to go and they had to get a license, an MPDES, a license. They had to bring all of their water system up to city standard. They had to put in all of the fire hydrants in Laie, and it cost them millions. Then they had to, there were sacred sites in Laie, and they had to go and look at them. They did a walkthrough and find out that the report was there's nothing significant. Found out there was several heiaus and sacred sites. It cost them, what was it now? It was a walkthrough. It was a couple of thousands for them. Then when we filed a complaint, hired a archaeologist, filed a report, and they had to go do it again. Now it cost them $200,000. So these are the kind of stuff we're involved in.
So who's calling the shots, and why do you think that the church's interests differ so much from the people in the community that they're here to serve?
The church is not here to serve the people. I think we need to get that very clear. The church is not here to serve the people. The church is here to serve the investors. Church members who are in business and who have money to spend and money to invest, it is their interest that the church is here for. Nobody else. Everything that the church does is about money. And I'm sorry to say that, but I cannot help but come to the same conclusion. I've done so much research, and that's all I keep coming up at, I mean, they're saying the people in Laie need the housing. They're offering housing in Malaikahana, 600 acres, 12 to 1,700 homes on lease land for 30 years. Now, why would you let people lease the land rather than selling it to them for fee simple? People want to invest the land that they know it's theirs. But what we're looking at is, the church has never said how much they would, if they built this home, how much it would cost, one. It always said that they would build this home for employees of BYU, Zion Security, or Hawaii Reserves Incorporated. Anyone employed by the church, these lands were going to be made available to them. And that means every place that the church has businesses in the world, they have first dibs, not the people in the community. There is no guarantee that the people in the community will be the first ones.
So if money is made for selling these pieces and stuff, where does the money go? Does the money stay here?
Of course not. It goes back to Salt Lake City.
Tell me that the money goes back.
Everything that the church has invested in, business, tithing, fast offering, all of the money goes back to Salt Lake City. And from Salt Lake City, it's dispersed. Okay. And the church has this company called Ensign Peaks, ENSIGN Peaks. The church and its leadership, especially I call them the Church Security Council. And this Church Security Council is made up of the church officials on the higher end of the presidency of the church. Their job is to make more money. So the church takes money without the consent of its members, put it inside Ensign Peaks, and they are given free rein to spend this money and invest it any which way they want. And there's only 6 people that sits on this committee.
All the time you've been here in the church, how many times have Hawaiians been in real power in Laie or the church?
Ole.
Tell me that.
Ole, 0. What an excellent question, and I'm going to tell you why. The church...
That's right, but the listeners won't hear my question, so I need you to say what the question
was. The church... Well, what is the question? Tell me. About the Hawaiians' leadership.
The entire time I've been here, I've seen Hawaiians in real positions of leadership, or the real positions of leadership.
Okay,
Whatever.
so what about the Hawaiians being in leadership positions in Hawaii? That's an excellent question, because a good example of that is the building of the church temple. The LDS temple in the Pacific a decision was made in 1912 by Joseph Fielding Smith. He declares that the first temple that's going to be built in the Pacific Basin is going to be built in Hawaii. Okay? So on November 19th, 1919, the Mormon temple in Hawaii is built and dedicated. Interesting enough, all of the presidents from then up to a year ago, or maybe 2 years ago, the first Hawaiian president was ever named, from 1919. Okay? So the question is, now why is that? When they built the temples in Samoa, the first temple president was a Samoan. When they built the temple in Tonga, the first temple president in Tonga was Tongan, but not in Hawaii. Never in Hawaii. So why? Races? Discrimination? Well, in 1889 to 1917, Hawaiians were taken to Utah to do temple work. Now the temple wasn't built yet, but they were doing sacred ceremonies in several houses. The temple was still being built. So while they're up there, there's some ceremonies done in the, I forget the name of the Seagull House or whatever. Then 3 Hawaiians have leprosy. Hawaiians call it maipake. You see, one thing about Hawaiians, we give credit where credit's due. Whoever brought the disease, they name them maipake, disease from the Chinese. Okay, so the white people in Salt Lake City and the surrounding areas are adamant to get rid of these people. Well, they're racist already. These people are being discriminated. The Polynesians, they had to go and buy things like blacks, back of the store. You go to the movies, second story, okay? Hawaiians have never experienced discrimination, ever. But this was new to them. But now they are being exiled into the desert, into this place called Skull Valley. Now, Skull Valley tells you it's a desert. Now, why are they going to send these people out in the desert? Well, you know, they made it where they form a committee and that the Hawaiians decided. How can Hawaiians decide when they never lived there? They never knew what it was like to have winter and the changes of climate, okay? So here the Hawaiians are out in the desert. They never prepared for the winter months. They moved out there in August 29, 1889, something like that. August 28, 1889. So come winter, they're not used to the cold. They won't go outside and help with the animals or anything like that. Now, for them to survive, they have to get water. There's no water out there. The only water is the water that the sheep and the cattle drink. They have to go drink the same water that these animals are drinking. And so they start getting sick. Typhus. Typhus, la grippe, typhus, la grippe, and something else. Okay, so then one of the missionaries that's out there in the desert, his wife gets sick. So they're going to bring the water into the community so that none of the missionary families are going to get sick. So now the guy's bringing water into the community. But before that, the graveyard was filling up with Polynesians. Now, so how do I know? Well, it just happened. My mother's parents were there. They were married there in 1911. My grandmother came from Samoa with the Mormon missionary. My grandfather was taken up there by his father, thinking that they would have better opportunities. They would be able to do temple work for their parents and their grandparents. But what happened was when they were out there and they needed to go and do temple work, when they went into Salt Lake City, they had to travel 70 miles from the desert into the city, Salt Lake City. And when they were out there, shall I wait?
roots go back actually to my grandfather was in Utah because he was brought in from Samoa.
No, grandmother.
Grandmother.
My grandmother was brought in from Samoa by this missionary named Thomas Court. And then,
I'm just going to ask you just because people want to understand. My grandmother was brought to Utah.
from Samoa.
Yeah. Because most people wouldn't think Utah. What the hell is she doing?
Okay, my grandmother was brought from Samoa by a Mormon missionary named Thomas Court to Utah. Okay? And then Thomas Court is a polygamist. So those who were practicing polygamy in Utah were escaping to Canada or to Mexico. So they asked my grandmother if she wanted to go with them. My grandmother said no. We believe, and his descendants believe, that our grandmother was one of his polygamous wives. Okay, so then she goes out into Skull Valley, to the desert. And one of the Samoan ladies who was a relative of hers said, if you love me, you won't go back to those haulis, those palangis. So she stayed out in the desert. In those days, you don't marry for love. You marry that for, not convenience either. Who can take care of you? So her aunt matchmake her to our grandfather, George Alapa. So my mom's brothers and sisters were born in Utah, called Yosepa. So they're out there. In 1911 they married. In 1917 they returned to Hawaii. And since they returned, they came here, they had a few more children, and then they're buried here in Laie. So, you know, that's the connection we have with Utah. So we still have families who live there. My brothers, my sisters, they and their children still up there. So, you know, they all go away, but they always call Hawaii home. The grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, call Hawaii home. Then they come here and they go, this is my home. They know it. And this land is theirs. And that's why they support what we do, because we are preserving the land for them and their children. So we are here fighting to preserve and protect this land. Not only this land, but all the lands of the people of Hawaii. So we're just an example of Hawaiians trying to remain loyal to their land.
So in the situation that brings you here today,
Yes?
that brought many people here today,
Yes?
who are the primary players? So there's someone in a home, there's somebody that doesn't want them in that home and wants to do something else with that land. Can you describe the whole scenario that brings us to right now?
That's an excellent question, because here in Laie, in Hawaii, the primary players are the president of HRI, or Hawaii Reserves, and the president is Eric Beaver. But Eric Beaver is just a symbol. The power is not in Eric Beaver. They use Eric Beaver as a front. Then you have Jeff T. Au, another one that's used as a front. Then you have Steve Hogue as another one as a front. Then you have George Reed, another one that's just a front. What these people do is they send a report to Salt Lake City and tell the people in Salt Lake City what they want them to know, but they don't tell them the truth. And those who are here on the land, on the front line, they tell them what they want them to hear, and then they start playing God. They start participating in God-like decision-making in Laie, but they're really not there. And they believe that people like me do not know that. I do know that. And I've always said, if I have to go through you, over you, under you, or around you, I know who the enemy is, and it's not you. You're just a front. You're just somebody that needs a job. But I know where the enemy is, and it's The enemy is the Mormon church leadership. And the Mormon church leadership is in this law firm called Curtin and McConkie. Curtin and McConkie has represented the Mormon church since 1960 or 1964 and up to the present. What people don't know about Curtin is Curtin's ancestors were part of Yosepa. A woman named Simel Fua Samon, who married a man named Mackie Howley. They had children. Some of the children died. The wife is buried in Yosepa. And then they had a daughter named Jane. Jane Mackey married this man named Wilfred Woodruff Curtin. Then they had a son named Wilfred Woodruff Curtin Jr. He ended up, became a lawyer, and he became the head of the law firm McConkie and Curtin. And it's his law firm who represents the church from in the 60s up to the present day.
Are they here or are they back in Salt Lake?
Salt Lake City.
In Salt Lake City.
You see, this kind of stuff, you're talking about millions of dollars for them, millions.
Billions.
And then I tell you, you know, the people, you know, what they do is they recruit people that have big business, and they bring them to BYU Hawaii campus. And what they do is they have them donate money to BYU. So let's say that your taxes for your business is let's say 10 million, your taxes. But instead of paying the taxes, you donate it to the church.
Tax deduction.
So instead of you donate 10 million to the church, but on the documentation, they say you donated 14 million. Yeah. You donate $14 million. So they give you like a credit of 4 million. And then if your company needs to make more money and you need to borrow, you can borrow from the church with that amount.
Why do you think the church, with this kind of relationship with the community, why does it have so many supporters here?
Look, the church is promising a place in heaven. Get it straight. What are we promising them? Temporary things. They want a place in heaven next to God. And the Mormon church is promising them that. You cannot fight that kind.
What role does the American government play in this relationship?
Majority of them, you know, the FBI agents and all that, they're all Mormons. And why? The federal government recruits majority of the FBI agents and any agencies in the enforcement agencies in the federal government, because the Mormons send their people to all the foreign countries so they can speak a second language.
Oh, that's a good point. And they're pretty trustworthy.
Oh yeah, and they don't smoke, they don't drink. Guess what? They cannot be coerced easily. But you coerce them with money, they'll fall fast. They love everything else, but when it comes to money, they will sell their wives and their daughters. Money. They don't discriminate.
Do you think that the role that the Polynesian Cultural Center claims to play in preserving,
No.
supporting culture?
No, the Polynesian Culture Center is a Howley's interpretation of who we are. You know the tikis out there. I mean, come on. You put a tiki over there, you're a Mormon church, and you're worshiping Hawaiian gods? So you're saying the Hawaiian gods is the one they're praying to make them more money, and which is true. I mean, I've seen it. They had the tikis right around the bend. I tell you, cars stopped all over the highway and created a traffic hazard. So they had to move it. Yeah.
What would you like to see to make things Pono for the land that you care about?
This is really what I'd like to see. I'd like the church to admit the wrong they've done. I'd like them to compensate all of the families. I'd like them to do the 4 things: restore the boundaries, restore the water, restore their access, provide water for them, for their families there. Just basically, that's it, I ask. Nothing more, nothing less.
Do you see it
Happening?
that it can have a role here with the church?
No.
Yeah.
That is like the church admitting that they made a wrong. The church will never admit they made a wrong. Yep. But you know what? As far as Hawaiians are concerned, God does not choose your religion. Okay? I mean, I believe that, you know, He created this. We're nobody. And all these people, they profess to be, you know, a church and everything. Let me tell you something. I believe this. Do you think a woman like me could bring the Mormon church to its knees? The answer is yes. I believe it. I can, and I shall.
It will help you.
Thank you. You know what's so funny? We went to Salt Lake City, just my son and I, and we picketed right in front of the church office.
Really?
Just 2 of us.
Wow.
And they called the police on us, okay? So here comes the 4 policemen. And the church has its own security. We was right there, right across McConkie and Curtin's law firm, 5-story building, and it's the church administration building, the original. So we protesting, just him and I. So the security guard comes over there and tries to tell us that you have no right to be here. And I says, oh yeah, we're members of the church. No, no, no. You cannot, you know, be here. So they tried to they said, we're going to call the cops. So we said, call them. They were surprised that we weren't afraid of that. So here comes the police officers. So they walk over to us. I look at this guy's badge, Wee Hongi. I tell him, hey, are you a Maori? He says, hey, I am a Maori. I said, aren't you from Hamilton? He says, how do you know I'm from Hamilton? I said, you smell like Hamilton. Hamilton is a country that raise a lot of cows, and it smells, you know, the doo-doo and everything. He started laughing. So he started telling us our rights. He said, Auntie, you see that place over the sidewalk, yeah? And over here, yeah? You can do anything you like, and even on the road. He did everything to help us. Then he goes in his car, brings us food. And then he says, hey, I just got this kumara from Laie. He says, hey, I said, we cannot eat from you. But why are you bribing us? No, 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 never mind. I'm not bribing nobody. Oh, you guys should have been at that march. Were you guys at the march? Waikiki, yes. 10,000. I was right there by Dukanamokus, and we were standing there, and they thought we were blocking them. I said, no, we're greeting them. So we chanted to welcome them and everything. And I tell you, we could see, I mean, we kept waiting for the line to end. They kept coming and coming. Oh, it was a beautiful sight.